Okay, so is your sex drive normal? I have notes so that I don't miss anything. So if I'm looking down, that's what I'm looking at. But there are a lot of questions that I get asked related to sex drive, related to libido, and wondering if you're normal, if something is wrong with you. Why is there a discrepancy between my sex drive and my partner's sex drive? So here are some of the questions that we will be answering in tonight's live stream. Is my sex drive normal? Why does my partner seem to want sex less than I do? Why don't I desire sex as much as I used to? I'm always the one to initiate. Why doesn't my partner initiate more? Why am I sometimes able to get turned on easily and other times it feels like climbing Mount Everest? And after hearing other people, like friends, talking about their sex lives, I seem to have a higher sex drive than other people. Is that normal? I don't know. Do you ever get questions around sex drive or libido with your clients, Victoria?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it's really common to think that men have this unattainable kind of sexual need. And so then when they have a lower libido or a lower sex drive, they feel like it's not normal, right? Because of that societal pressure that they need to be just chasing everyone down for sex.
That's a good point. That there's definitely a gender piece to this,
Yeah.
right?
All that's like slut shaming, right? So if you
Yes.
have a high libido as a vulva owner or a woman, right? You're shamed for that.
Right. And so a question a client might have is, why, if you're a woman, why is my sex drive seem so high? And does that make me slutty? Or, there might be some shame attached to just how high that person's sex drive is. And the same for a man. If he's noticing that he doesn't desire sex as much as his female partner, there's a lot of shame attached there. I think for both partners too, because then the woman or female partner might be wondering, why isn't he chasing me around the house trying to pull my pants down? I thought
Exactly.
that's what this was going to be like.
Right, right. So they think it's something wrong with them.
Yeah. So we are going to answer all of those questions in tonight's discussion. So, is your sex drive normal? There's the short answer and the long answer. And the short answer, and I guess you could just stop listening after this and move on with your evening, is yes, your sex drive is normal. And if you want to know why and how, then keep listening. Keep listening, Victoria. Okay. So the first thing we're going to talk about is something called the dual control model. And this relates to the concept, it's like an analogy that your sex drive has two parts, an accelerator and your brakes. So your accelerator is what puts you into drive, right? It's what gets your libido or sex drive going. It's what promotes your level of arousal and moves things forward. And this happens based on, recognizing anything that seems sexual related. So what you see, smell, taste, hear, touch. I don't know if I missed one of the senses, but you get it. One of those senses. Also, what you're feeling emotionally and even the thoughts that you have and what you believe in. These are all things that can hit the accelerator. In fact, it's always on a little bit, which I think is interesting. Your accelerator is always on a little, even right now, as we are talking about the topic of sex. Everyone's accelerators just gently being tapped. Or maybe a lot tapped. I mean, again, we're here to talk about how all sex drives are normal. And then your brakes. This is the part of you that is noticing all the reasons to not be turned on, right? Again, same, all things that you notice. See, hear, taste, touch, smell, hear. I might have repeated one, but you get it. The things that you the emotions you feel, the thoughts that you believe, these are also or all variables that could come into play hitting those brakes. And the context matters, right? So right now, maybe your accelerator is being hit a little bit, tapped, just because we're talking about sex. But we're live in front of the internet. So there's a lot of reasons why our brakes would be hit right now, right? Like,
And I'm curious, I would bet that there's people out there that wonder what things of theirs that hit their accelerator or their brakes, if that's normal. So if anyone has questions about that, feel free to drop it in the chat room.
oh, we're going to talk about it. We're going to identify some examples, but
Perfect.
what hits your accelerator, what hits your brakes is incredibly unique to every person. So learning that about yourself is quite powerful because it kind of gives you the keys to understanding your own sex drive and, you know, why you might be in the mood one day versus another, and what kind of factors get in the way, are barriers for you for, you know, getting into that mood, into that sexy state of mind. For some people, I mean, the process of becoming aroused is basically turning on all the ons and turning off all the offs. That's like the recipe, right? That's success right there. For some people, though, who have learned that their sexuality is a threat, perhaps it could be because of your sexual orientation or your sexual identity, the way you're perceived culturally. It could be due to religious trauma growing up, living in a home where your family was very shaming about sex. For those people, sometimes your accelerator and your brakes kind of get hit simultaneously. And so that is also a possibility, that even though you're turning on all the ons, there's a part of you that still is hitting the brakes because it doesn't feel safe. So know that. Okay. So it's also like completely normal to feel some ambivalence around sex, I think, for this very reason, right? So an example might be, I believe this is an example from Emily Nagoski's book, Come As You Are. Got her last name correct this time. So Emily, if you're listening.
There we go.
We did it right this time. She wrote a fantastic book, Come As You Are. Definitely a little bit more oriented towards a female audience, but a lot of the information in there is relevant to all genders. But she gives this example of how sometimes there's ambivalence. So let's say something that's hitting your accelerator could be like the way a partner is like kissing your neck, that you really like the way that they're kissing your neck. But let's say you're at a party with a bunch of friends and there's people around watching, that could be hitting your brakes.
That makes sense.
And for somebody else, same situation, they might not really like the way their neck is being kissed by their partner. It's not really doing it for them. Maybe that's hitting the brakes, but they actually like the fact that there are people around and they're in public, and that's hitting the accelerator.
Yeah.
So there is no, you know, one size fits all here. It's very individual. So if we have anybody listening, and they are feeling, you know, like they want to contribute and participate, please feel free to drop in the chat. What do you notice are some variables that serve as an accelerator to you? I'm going to, in a moment here, find a list. I have a list.
Oh, right.
Victoria, are you aware of any accelerators in the work that you've done with your clients? Like, did they identify some common themes, or do you know, or have you heard any really unique variables that are a turn on for some people?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm thinking of like a couple I've worked with, the female was really turned on by like light touching. And so she thought that she was initiating via light touching of her partner, because that's how she gets turned on. It's an accelerator for her. So she thought that might be his accelerator as well, when really his accelerator was emotional connection. So having a deep conversation.
Interesting. So she wanted to be touched very lightly.
Yeah.
And he's like, we need to have this like deep, introspective, intimate conversation.
Right.
And that's what does it for him.
Yeah.
I feel like you could combine those two very, very well. They seem
Oh,
like
I
they would
agree.
go well together.
I agree. But I think recognizing accelerators too can help different couples, figure out initiation, right? Because one person might be like, oh, I'm going to initiate, I'm going to brush their knee. And the other person's like, oh, that was nice. No clue that they were trying to, have some spicy time that night. And then the other person's feeling rejected because they tried to initiate. It's like complete mismatch in communication.
That's a good point because I think the more you know about yourself, the more you can communicate that with a partner. And it's
Yeah.
only going to improve your sex life together, right?
Right.
It was not the last live stream, but the one before that, we talked about like what is the best resource for improving your sex life. And the answer to that question was yourself, your own body,
Yeah.
kind of your own inner workings. The best tool you can give yourself is knowing yourself. And that's hopefully after tonight's live stream, you'll have some idea on how to better do that. So here are some common things that activate the accelerator. And this is from the Come As You Are workbook, The Practical Guide to the Science of Sex by Emily Nagoski. I like to give credit where credit is due. So, partner characteristics, feeling wanted by your partner, feeling connected to your partner, thinking about sex, reading erotica or looking at porn or otherwise consuming sexually explicit media, being touched just the right way, being in a setting you associate with sex, such as on vacation, at a place where you've previously had positive sexual experience. So those are some common variables that hit the accelerator. I've certainly heard a lot of those from clients I've worked with.
And it makes sense that there are associations, right? If you find that you're always having sex in hotel rooms, like when you're on vacation, the context of a hotel room might turn you on.
Yeah. Or if you're used to paying a sex worker in the same setting, might also trigger some memories.
That's true. Yeah. Associations with like smell, right? Oh, it always smelled like lavender because of our candle when we were having sex. So now whenever I smell lavender, I feel turned on, right? Like all those associations.
Yeah. It's like how we're conditioned too. And a lot of times this starts early on in life, like, in puberty, your early sexual experiences. If you're wondering, well, how did I formulate, what hits my accelerator versus what hits my brakes? It's usually learned based on our environment, our first sexual experiences, what we're taught about sex. So it involves kind of maybe looking backwards a little bit to understand yourself better. And if you're having difficulty identifying any of these variables, working with a sex therapist might be a good idea to help you understand yourself better and how, looking at your roots and how you developed, what hits your accelerator versus your brakes. Okay. Some common things that hit the brakes. If anyone is listening and wants to contribute what hits the brakes for them, that might be an easier one to share.
Less vulnerable, I'm
Probably,
sure.
yeah, it's a little, right? Like I feel like it's a little bit easier to talk about, well, like this gets in the way for me versus like, well, this is what really does it for me,
Absolutely.
Okay, stress. Number one, stress. Body image, shame, performance anxiety, fear of being interrupted or caught. For some people, that's an accelerator.
Yeah.
Relationship characteristics, especially trust, a history of sexual trauma, parenting, constantly being touched by your children, thus associating touch with parenting mode rather than sexy mode, worries about reputation, and feeling expected or obligated to have sex are all some common themes in what hits the brakes. It gets you thinking about, well, what hits the brakes for you, right? And if we think about stress is a really big one, and they've done some research on rats and how their brains work. And I imagine that, okay, we have someone contributing here. Being in a partner's parents' house is a break.
That makes sense. Right?
Yeah.
Fear that they might hear. Right? That would be anxiety provoking for sure.
I wonder, is it if the parents are home, or if just knowing you're in an environment that is your partner's parents' home?
It's a good question.
I'd love to know more specifics about that. Penguin ZP.
While we're waiting on penguins, one thing that I was thinking that I think can be really difficult is, for some people, they might have a break that is a necessity. And what I mean by that is, right, there are some people with maybe medical complications where they require, unfortunately, different, either like special lubricants or gel that can assist with pain. And that in itself is kind of a break for them, because it's associated with the pain, but it's a necessity to engage in that activity.
That would kind of like disrupt the mood and the vibe going, that like knowing I have to pause and like address like a medical or a physical need I have kind of gets in the way. And so that would be hitting the brakes. Okay, Penguin ZP. I think just being there regardless of if they are home, but definitely if they are home, that makes it even worse. Yeah. That makes sense, right? And I think you could dig deeper. Like, where does that come from? Is it like from having been caught as a teenager, or just knowing that, like, I don't know, parents represent this like asexual like being, even though they're not, that it's just like, or the risk of being caught, just being in like a family-oriented domestic like place, maybe just like gets in the way of like the sexy time mode. Yeah. Makes sense to me.
Holly, do you have any that you'd like to share?
Of my own?
Let's be vulnerable here. Let's model and take one from Penguin.
All right. We're going there. Like a break.
Yeah, a break.
Okay, good. I feel a little bit better about
a break.
Live. It's like our fourth live stream.
People to share. I feel like we should share.
Okay. I mean, stress is an obvious one, which we can explore in a minute there, but I feel like I want to be more specific than that. I was not prepared for this question. I want to think about it and be like thoughtful on it. Do you have one like off the top of your head that you know?
Off the top of my head, I would think like the dog being in the room, right? Like if there's panting or like they're in the way. Like that can make things a little awkward. It's hard to be mindful, right? And in the moment when you have another creature in the room doing their thing.
Like scooting up to you. Oh my gosh, that's a good one. That makes sense. Yeah. I think if I'm in a very busy go, rush mode, focused on a lot of things, it can be hard to clear my mind, I think. So that would be like a barrier for me in terms of like how to get into a more relaxed state, to be open to, the sexual parts of myself coming out to play. So, yeah, how busy life gets. And there's always like a million things to do. And I was just joking the other day, I wish I could clone myself. Life would be easier if there was two of me. But,
and I think it's great that you said that, because I think so many people can relate to that. I mean, even just in our culture and society, it's like productivity is so valued. And so people are just always on the go, feeling like they need to do the next thing. Hard to be mindful and relaxed.
Yeah. It's a good segue into like the next part of all of this, which is, stress and just how big of a role that plays. It's really hard it hits the brakes pretty firmly. It's hard to get into a sexual state of mind if you're not in a relaxed state. And so they've done some, research on this, and they've done research on rats. And there were 3 different like cage environments, I guess, that they explored. And they put these probes in the rat's brain because, animal testing. And the one probe stimulated the part of the brain, and I'm using a layman's terms here, people, so be aware, but it's the part of the brain that like creates some interest and curiosity. And then the other probe would stimulate the part of the brain that identifies some sort of threat or like a fear-based response. And so they put them in, a standard cage first that, was just like a normal environment, a normal lab type environment. And when they probed the part of the brain that showed, creates interest and curiosity, they would respond that way, like, oh, what's this? Like interest in, exploring. And then if they like zapped the part of the brain that is associated with kind of fear and threat, they'd be like, wow, what is that? It was like their reaction. And then they put the rats in a cage that was dark and quiet and smelled like their mother and was just like the rat version of a spa. And and they stimulated the curious interest part of the brain, and the rats showed curiosity and interest, and then they stimulated the part of the brain that induces threat and fear, and they still showed curiosity and interest, which says something about like that environment. And then they put them in another cage that I guess in the research it was like more of a hectic, loud noises, kind of chaotic environment. Apparently they played Iggy Pop music. I don't even know what that is. If anyone listening knows what Iggy Pop is, feel free to explain. But when they
we're old.
Is that for young? I have no idea.
I don't know.
Iggy Pop. But if they stimulated the part of the rat's brain that would elicit curiosity and interest, they reacted with a what is this response, and the same for that threatening fear-based response. So the idea being that your environment and the context really does play a role, and if you're in a relaxed state of mind and in a comfortable place, that you are more likely to move towards something and be curious about it and want to explore it, which is associated with the sexual parts of ourselves. So it's interesting, but stress is a big one, and our culture is a high stress, high anxiety, high productivity culture. There's a lot to get in the way of the breaks. So when a person struggles with their arousal, desire, or even reaching orgasm, there could be one of 2 reasons going on here. Too little stimulation of the accelerator or too much stimulation on the brakes. Which one do you think is more common for most people?
Too much stimulation on the brakes.
You're right. That is more often the case. So if you are someone that is struggling with arousal and desire and wanting to improve your sex drive, one thing to really look into is what is hitting the brakes for you, and how can I decrease those variables in my life? How can I create a context, a lifestyle where that's not as relevant for me?
Which makes sense, right? Because at the beginning you were talking about the accelerator always being on. So if it's always on a little bit, if we can just take away the barriers, then we're good to go.
Yeah. I know I can only speculate about why that might be, and I'm not a scientist, right? So I don't know why that would always be on a little bit, but other than like it's kind of part of being a human being, that I think sexuality is associated with playfulness and fun and feeling alive and connection, and I think naturally we want that. We want that for ourselves and with partners. So it would make sense that we would be inclined to lean more in that direction. But we're also complex creatures.
Absolutely.
And so here is the reason why your sex drive is normal. The biggest reason is that There is a variety of combinations that comes into play. Somebody could have, there's different sensitivities with accelerator and with your brake. Some people have a very sensitive accelerator. Things hit that accelerator quickly and easily. Good for you. That's a wonderful, well, for some people it can be problematic.
Yeah.
It could create some compulsive sexual behaviors, or even just some problematic behaviors in your relationship. Let's say you actually respond to stress in a way where you want to have sex, that like even that's hitting your accelerator, that you're like, oh, I could just really, if I just got off right now, it would make everything better. That could really, conflict with your partner who's like, how on earth could you be considering that right now? Like, we are under so much stress. So it's not always a wonderful thing, but some people have very sensitive accelerators and very, not as sensitive brakes, right? And you could have very sensitive brakes where things, get in the way very easily for you. It's really hard to, tap into, get that accelerator going and remove those brakes. So there's a variety of combinations. You could have sensitive accelerator and sensitive brakes, or both could be quite low, which I think some people that identify as asexual might relate to if you have very, a low accelerator and low brakes. There is a quiz. I don't know if it's online, but there are some quiz. I don't know how I could share this. There's a way, we'll figure it out. But there are some online or in a book, I know, quizzes, maybe online. I will look into it, where you can take the test and see where you fall, like how sensitive your accelerator is versus how sensitive your brakes are.
Yeah.
So a variety of combinations there. And, there's not a lot of control you have over that. It's just your unique makeup. So learning that about yourself and owning that about yourself is going to give you the tools to, tap into what you need in order to be able to be sexual when you want to be, right? And navigate that with a partner. Oh, and I did make a note here. More than half of people, though, fall in the middle. They're not really high on one extreme or the other, or really low in one extreme or the other. So good news is that you're probably, chances are statistically, you're somewhere in the middle. And it's just really learning what those variables are for you. What hits your accelerator, what hits your brakes, turns on all the ons and turns off all the offs. Okay. So the other piece to understanding your sex drive is that there are sex drive types. And I really am passionate about this topic because for a lot of people, this is like a liberating for them to learn this about themselves. So there are two main desire types. And the first one is spontaneous desire. And it kind of means what's in the title, that you might be just going about your day and you start thinking about sex and you start to feel aroused and you're in the mood. It just kind of happens, sometimes out of the blue, and you're ready to explore. You're ready to give it a go. It is sexual desire that you feel in anticipation of pleasure. So just the thinking about it, anticipating it, knowing that maybe you have a date later, knowing that you're going to be with a partner, or just be sexual with yourself later, like that is enough to elicit desire. And I should clarify, there is a difference between arousal and desire. Arousal is physical. So that involves, the obvious things. So the most obvious is an erection for, a penis, lubrication for vulva, increasing heart rate, your breathing quickens, nipples harden. Am I missing anything? Increase in blood flow.
I was going to say things that maybe we don't feel or notice, right? Like lengthening or widening of the vagina.
Oh, right. Yes. A very physical response, right?
Right.
Yeah. Arousal is very physical. Desire is more of the mental process of wanting sex. And sometimes those align really well, and sometimes they don't. You could have an arousal response and not feel mental desire. I mean, you know, like a male riding the bus and you're going over too many bumps, and, you know, next thing you know, you have an erection. Not necessarily wanting sex, not even thinking about it, just kind of like happens, you know?
Yeah.
You know, another example would be, you know, that sometimes our bodies respond as if they're physically aroused, but mentally, you know, you're not wanting what's happening. This would be an example of something that's happening in cases of sexual abuse, or something not consensual, something you're uncomfortable with, you know. So, which that is called non-concordance and could be its own topic at a future time, but just know that there is a difference between the two. So we're talking about, you know, desire types, what makes you want sex mentally. And so the spontaneous desire, this type of desire type is more commonly associated with men, right? Like we think they're just kind of like horny all the time, ready to go.
Right. The wind can blow and they're like, let's do it.
There's all those like funny, like, you know, reels out there on social media of like, you know, all in, like taking my socks off and my husband's like, you know, like she's stripping, you know, that this is,
right.
You know, it doesn't take much to anticipate that, you know, anticipate sex and feel that desire and just thinking about it. So, but we tend to associate this more with men, which it is a little bit more common with men, but not nearly as much as our culture would have us believe, right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. When I'm bored, my body can get aroused.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I would think that could be indicative of maybe a spontaneous desire type.
I was also wondering too, I wonder if there's an association there, penguins, right? Like if in your life, when you've been bored, you've turned to maybe like sexual material to keep your mind occupied, right? Maybe now boredom is an erotic emotion for you.
Boredom could become possibly an accelerator, something that hits the accelerator. If you're used to like, I'm bored, I have nothing to do. Let's say that started in your teenage years. So you masturbate or you view pornography, or that can become an associated emotion, with something that hits your accelerator. Isn't that fascinating? I don't know if that's the case for you penguins, but it's possible.
Yeah.
You know, that could be an example for somebody, and something like that is just, I think it's fascinating. That is probably
likely. And normal. Normal.
So normal. I love you, Victoria. You're so supportive and encouraging. I'm like, yep, probably spontaneous desire. Moving on. And you're like, well, high school homework time.
I get it.
So to get back in the mood, you just need to go back to school. I mean, it's quite simple. You need to just fill your life with homework. But if you're a spontaneous desire type, it's, probably it's a little bit easier to kind of get into that mental state. Okay. Let's see, I have a note to myself to reference another book. This book is called Sex Talks by Vanessa Marin and her husband Xander Marin. And it's really good. It's mostly focused on how to talk to your partner about your sex life, because a lot of people struggle with that. Okay.
Which we'll definitely have to have a whole stream set aside to that, about talking about
Absolutely.
sex.
I think there's some really good tips and strategies we can give people as to how to approach the topic, how to have the best outcome, right, and be productive. Okay. So you're probably a spontaneous type if. Here are some ways that you might be able to identify if you are a spontaneous desire type. You feel the desire for sex at seemingly random points throughout the day, in the middle of a work meeting, while raking the lawn, or even on the toilet. You sometimes feel the desire for sex before your body responds, as in you're in the mood, but you don't have an erection, aren't wet, or haven't had any other physical response. You're typically the one who initiates sex in your relationship. You seem to want sex more frequently than your partner. Keyword seem. You can feel turned on in a lot of different situations, like when your in-laws just stopped over. No problem. Penguins, that would not be the case for you, I think. Okay, so that is spontaneous desire type. Now, the other desire type is responsive desire. I'm having a hard time deciphering my own notes. Okay. This is when you desire sex in response to pleasure. So first there is something pleasurable, some sort of pleasurable stimulation. It doesn't have to be physical. It could be, again, thinking about the things that hit the accelerator, things you see, smell, hear, taste, touch, believe. It could be reading erotica. It could be viewing pornography. It could be, your partner has initiated some sort of sexual engagement with you, and you really don't mentally feel the desire to want sex until you're responding to pleasure in some way. So this is a lesser known desire type. Most people don't know about this. It's completely normal, just as normal as the spontaneous desire type, right? It's more commonly associated with women. Women tend to lean more towards the responsive desire type, but both men and women can have this desire type. So what that can look like for a partner is that they're never in the mood. They never want to have sex. I'm always the one initiating. But really, that's just their makeup, is they're responding. They first need to feel something pleasurable to respond to, and then their mental desire kicks in. Do you have anything you want to add about that, Victoria?
Yeah. One is the caveat of this doesn't imply that, you should forego consent, right? Don't just go and shove your hand down your partner's pants if they have responsive desire, right? Right. Maybe have a discussion around what accelerators they have or what breaks you can take away to help with the responsive desire.
Yeah. It's a good point. There was an example in one of the books, I can't remember which one, where there was a couple that one of the therapists was working with, and the wife was like, he just stuck his hand down my pants and started going for it. And I'm like, what are you doing? I'm not in the mood. And he was like, but you will be. And, okay, there's still a lot of other variables that come into play, like what we talked about, the accelerator and the brakes. There could be a lot hitting the brakes there, and they're still not going to be able to tap into that responsive desire. But it's important to know this because I think there's a lot of angst and pain associated, emotional pain associated with feeling like your partner is not spontaneously in the mood. And we see that as a problem. We see this as there's a problem with me. I'm not just ready to go when I see my partner. I don't ever find myself just wanting sex randomly. And we're not shown that that's normal culturally. It's not really talked about. It's not, certainly not in pornography. It's not in movies,
No, not in any sort of media.
Nothing.
Right?
It's like it
in
doesn't
media, everything's
exist.
Spontaneous and sparks fly and there's no effort needed.
Yes. And so this is why I feel passionate about this topic, because it can be this light bulb moment for so many people to go, oh, wait, that's me. Because once I kind of get the ball rolling, or once the right circumstances that I find pleasurable are around, then I do feel it. But I think part of, we value kind of the male default culturally, and we tend to associate a spontaneous desire type where sex is spontaneous. We just look at each other and know. It's not only a little bit more associated with men versus women, but it's also what a lot of couples experience in the early phase of their relationship. It's easier for less breaks to be on and to be hitting the accelerator when you're new in a relationship. You have that new relationship energy. There's novelty. You're excited. You're actually anticipating seeing one another. You get excited to see one another, which is spontaneous desire. It's desire in anticipation of pleasure. And when you're newly dating somebody, there's a lot of anticipation of pleasure. So it's common that people fall into the spontaneous desire type in the early phase of their relationship. But what happens is when that fades and one person continues to be a spontaneous desire type and the other partner, falls into a more responsive desire type, there's a lot of angst involved in like wondering what's wrong, what happened, what's wrong with this, am I not in the right relationship? Do I not love this person anymore? It's a very painful experience for people.
I think it's so great that you highlighted that you can change, right, through time. Because I think a lot of people would think, okay, I'm either this or that, rather than this can also ebb and flow depending on something such as how long you've been with someone.
Yes. And I think this is fascinating as well because you're hitting on one of my other notes here, which is that most people have some level of fluidity through these desire types, which is kind of fascinating. So if you find yourself in one category or the other, it doesn't mean you'll forever stay there. And it's not like other fixed traits that we tend to have, like for example, our person, like whether you lean introverted versus extroverted, like those personality characteristics, those tend to kind of stay fixed throughout your lifetime and in a variety of contexts in your life, at home, at work, with your friends. But your desire type can change. So it's very likely that you will find yourself experiencing one versus the other or have already experienced one and the other in your lifetime. So there's a list of you might be responsive. You might be a responsive desire type if you rarely think about sex. Sex doesn't sound tempting until you're getting started or in the middle of it. Sometimes at the end of sex, you think to yourself, that was fun. Why don't I want that more often? You rarely initiate sex with your partner. You seem to want sex less frequently than your partner. It feels like the situation needs to be just right in order for you to feel turned on. The bedroom has to be tidied. The kids have to be asleep. You have to be fresh out of the shower, which again also contribute to those variables that contribute to your accelerator versus your brakes.
Right.
Is anyone feeling liberated? Does anybody want to share in the chat? Are they like, yes, this is me. Someone finally gets me. And it's okay if not.
I think it's great in reducing a lot of shame, because I do think that there's a lot of shame in mostly responsive, but there is some in spontaneous too.
Yeah. I think there's like gender norms that play a role.
Yeah.
And that we think we're supposed to be a certain way as our assigned gender. So if you're a man and you have a responsive desire type, I think there can be a lot of shame there. And like we talked about earlier, if you're female and you have a spontaneous desire type, you might have less angst around that because it is more the culturally preferred desire type. It's kind of what everyone thinks is supposed to be normal and what we should all be behaving like and feeling. So, but yeah.
And I think it's helpful for the partners of men, right? Because with that kind of societal expectation that they all are spontaneous, these partners may feel like it's something personal to them if they're not experiencing that spontaneous. So knowing that there is a responsive desire type, I think can help reduce that shame for the partners as well.
Yeah. Understanding yourself and then your partner understanding you as well and your, how to help you tap into that sexual part of yourself, hit the accelerator and remove those brakes, I think is one of the best gifts you can offer yourself and each other in a relationship. And alleviates shame. It empowers you to, own what makes you unique. Emily Nagoski talks about she likes to help people experience confidence and joy, that's like the key to your best sexual self. Confidence is knowing what is true about you, and joy is loving what is true about you. And that is, yeah, it makes sense. The knowing part can be hard to come around to, because you might be thinking, okay, it sounds like I'm a responsive desire type, but I don't want to be. I wish I wasn't, right? And that's like the joy part can be hard, of like loving what's true about you. So I think the first step is knowing what is true about you and your unique makeup. And in time and with some reflection, maybe some therapy, you can come around to maybe finding some joy in that.
Yeah, it's all about how you frame it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There was like a funny, well, I don't know if it was funny. I feel like when I was reading it at like 11 o'clock last night, it felt funny. So it might not actually be funny.
When you were delirious.
Yeah, when I was like, I need to go to bed. And all I wrote was read the analogy. Of course, at 11 o'clock last night, I didn't write
Your past
down
self was
where
like, that's a future Holly problem.
Maybe I had the intention of writing it down. Hang on. Oh, wait, here it is. Oh, I did find it. Okay. Oh, if you're struggling, okay, so this again from the Come As You Are workbook. If you're struggling to differentiate spontaneous and responsive desire, consider this analogy from sex therapist Christine Hyde. If your best friend invites you to a party, of course you accept because it's your best friend and a party. But maybe as the date approaches, you start to worry about arranging childcare or dreading the traffic. And when the night arrives, you don't feel like putting on your party clothes after a long day at work. But you said you would go, so you put on your party clothes and you go. I'm wondering what was funny about this.
The party clothes, maybe?
Oh. And what happens? Usually you have fun at the party. If you're having fun, you're doing it right. That's responsive desire. Spontaneous desire in this analogy would be the sudden urge to go to a party, even if there was no party planned. Consider this. If you had been to this friend's parties a dozen times and they were always duds, with food you didn't enjoy and people you didn't quite trust, would any amount of wanting to go to a party make that party worth going to? So there's a few things here. I don't know why I thought that was funny, actually.
Maybe the party clothes.
Reading it now, I'm like,
put on your party clothes.
Yeah, put on your party clothes and go. It's interesting because I think that's true for a lot of people that are more of a responsive desire type, and that they struggle with, you know, the thoughts that get in the way, all those things that are hitting their brakes, and, you know, they struggle with being able to tap into that state of mind. But then once you're there, you're like, I am having fun. This actually is great.
Right.
And I'm doing this
and
because I love my
context.
And context, right? Because if that friend's party is always kind of sucked and you just didn't really have a good time anyway, why would you, no amount of wanting, is going to change that. So first, like, have a sex life worth wanting, I think, is the biggest takeaway here. But also, it's normal to have, if you're a responsive desire type, it's normal to know that there's going to be barriers, it's going to be hard, but that once you're in that state and you're open to exploring pleasure, that you will then start to feel that mental desire. Which is why a lot of like couples will schedule sex, which does not sound very sexy to a lot of people, but it is something that a lot of long-term couples do, especially if one partner falls into a responsive desire type. It's just means you're making that part of your relationship a priority, and you're trusting that you're gonna do your best to turn on all the ons, turn off all the offs, and trust that, you know, my desire will kind of kick in if I'm practicing, you know, doing what works for me and my unique makeup and communicating that with my partner. And I'll probably be glad I went to the party once I'm there, right?
Right. But I think the myths around sex always needing to be spontaneous really makes those couples feel like this is wrong, that there's something wrong with their sex life. They shouldn't be having to schedule it.
Mm-hmm.
Where why can't we frame it as like, okay, you used to schedule to go on dates and you knew you were probably going to have sex after that date, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and you were excited about that. You were technically excited about scheduled sex. So why can't we view this similarly?
Right. And we schedule all kinds of other things that we find important in our lives. Right? So the word schedule maybe is what people get caught up on, because we think when we schedule something, it's like a task we have to do and we feel obligated to do or committed to. But isn't your sex life with your partner something that you also prioritize and want to make time for, and, you know, make that connection with one another? And is it really that different? I think it actually shows that you are committed and prioritizing your relationship. Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay. I think that we covered everything I wanted to cover tonight.
Yeah. As we summarize, feel free to pop in the chat with any questions.
Yes, now would be a great time if you have any questions about any of the information covered tonight. You have a question about yourself or a suggestion for a future live stream, we would love to hear it. So hopefully by now you would have learned, if you've made it this far in the live stream here, that your sex drive is completely normal. There is nothing wrong with you. You have a unique makeup based on what variables hit your accelerator, what variables hit your brakes, how sensitive your accelerator is versus your brakes, and that there's some unique combination there. Most people are kind of somewhere in the middle. And that there are two desire types: spontaneous desire, which is desire in anticipation of pleasure, and responsive desire, which is desire in response to pleasure. Both normal, very common. Nothing is wrong with either or.
Perfectly said.
And context matters, right? Where you are, who you're with.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that, Holly.
You're welcome.
Of course, penguins.
Thank
you for joining in the chat. We really enjoyed having you here.
Yes, thank you so much.
We'll be here Wednesdays at 8:30 Eastern Time, so feel free to come back and pop in the chat.
Next week will be Victoria's turn to take the lead on a topic, and I look forward to it. Feel free to use the suggestion box below for any questions you might think about after we end tonight, or any topic suggestions you'd like to make. Okay.
All right.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.